Ever notice how, like, the same story can sound totally different depending on who's telling it, you know?
Sorry?
Like, total different. We're taking that idea to, like, a global scale today.
Right.
Like, diving into how the legacy of colonialism shapes how we even understand forced displacement. I mean, it's a big idea.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating how often we box colonialism in as just this thing of the past, right? Just about,
Mhm.
controlling land. But the real impact, the stuff we're like really unpacking today, is how it shaped the very way we see and understand the world, like the core of how we think about things.
Yeah, right. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like a hidden layer of history that's still like influencing things today without us even realizing it.
Ex-
And to guide our deep dive today, you found some research. It's from the Organization for Social Science Research in Eastern and Southern Africa.
Yeah.
And they're arguing that decolonizing knowledge is like absolutely crucial to even beginning to grasp the complexities of forced displacement. So, like, where do we even begin with that?
Well, I think, it starts with just acknowledging that for a long time, a single perspective has dominated research and understanding of forced displacement, often overlooking the experiences and knowledge of the very communities most affected by it.
Okay, so it's about like whose story gets told, whose reality counts, right?
Exactly, yeah. Imagine a map. For centuries, it's been drawn by the same hands, emphasizing certain roads and landmarks while completely ignoring others. And decolonizing knowledge is about recognizing those missing pieces, those alternative routes, and really understanding how they change the entire map. How they change our understanding of the whole thing.
So it's not about like throwing out the old map, it's about redrawing it,
Exact.
to be more inclusive, more accurate, to reflect like everyone's journey, essentially.
Precisely. And that includes uh, questioning how we even define and study forced displacement in the first place. For instance, just relying solely on numbers and statistics,
Okay.
while important, can really miss the human side of things.
Oh, totally. You can say like this many people were displaced, but like what are the stories behind those numbers?
Exactly. What are their actual experiences? Like
Yeah.
numbers just don't.
Right, they don't tell the whole story.
Mm.
A decolonized approach would center those voices using methods like oral histories, storytelling, even working directly with communities to shape the research itself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Instead of like just taking information, it's about like really learning and collaborating.
Absolutely.
That's a research project I could get behind.
It's a fundamental shift, really, from simply extracting data to engaging in a genuine exchange of knowledge.
Yeah. And that takes us back to colonialism's legacy. Our source talks about how indigenous populations were often labeled as primitive to justify taking their land, which is just a stark example of how power dynamics play out in shaping knowledge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This wasn't just about physical control, right? It was about controlling the narrative, defining entire groups of people in ways that serve colonial interests. And these narratives, unfortunately, can linger long after the colonizers are gone.
It's almost like an echo of the past that's like distorting how we see the present.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of recognizing our own biases,
Mhm.
because we inherit these ways of thinking, whether we're aware of it or not. Decolonizing knowledge is an ongoing process of examining those biases, challenging our assumptions, and actively seeking out alternative perspectives, like really actively seeking them out.
So it's less about finding all the right answers and more about like asking better questions, which honestly is way more challenging than I thought.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a journey, not a destination. And it requires us to be, at times, to be comfortable with discomfort, to be open to having our worldviews challenged. But it's in that discomfort, in that willingness to unlearn and relearn, that I think true understanding can emerge.
Speaking of challenging assumptions,
Mhm.
the source also brought up this idea of intellectual dependency, I think they called it.
Yeah, yeah. This is a crucial point. Essentially, it argues that colonialism made it very difficult for marginalized communities to control their own narratives. They,
Yeah.
they didn't have the same platform or resources to share their experiences and knowledge on their own terms.
Which like just perpetuates a cycle of being misunderstood or misrepresented, right?
Exactly.
It's like being talked about instead of being invited to the table to share your own story.
Yeah, precisely. And that's why decolonizing knowledge is so important. It's about creating space for those silenced voices. It's about recognizing that knowledge and expertise exist in many forms, not just within, Western academic institutions.
Yeah. It's about recognizing the value of lived experience, of different ways of knowing. This is really making me reconsider like how we define expertise in the first place, you know? What would you say to someone who's hearing all of this and thinking like, okay, but what does this actually look like in practice? Like what does this actually look like?
That's a fantastic question
Yeah.
because it highlights that decolonizing knowledge isn't just some, abstract concept. It has real-world implications. It changes how we approach research, policy making, even just our everyday interactions.
So how do we move beyond just like simply acknowledging the problem? How do we actually start putting this into practice? Like what are some concrete steps we can take?
Well, I think it starts with awareness, really.
Okay, so like being mindful of those blind spots we were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
exactly. Yeah. Recognize that the way we understand the world is shaped by so many factors, including, our upbringing, our education, even just the media we consume. It all plays a role.
So it's about recognizing that we all have a lens through which we see the world. It's not about getting rid of the lens, it's about understanding how it shapes our perspective, right?
Precisely. And once we start, questioning our own assumptions, we can begin to seek out different perspectives, different ways of knowing. For example, if you're interested in learning more about forced displacement, don't just read reports from international organizations.
Yeah.
Seek out firsthand accounts from displaced people themselves. Explore literature from their cultures. Engage with their art. There are so many ways to do this.
So diversify our information diet. It's like
Yeah.
if you only ever eat one type of food, you're missing out on a whole world of flavors, you know?
I like that analogy, yeah. It's about expanding our palate, so to speak, when it comes to knowledge and understanding.
This is making me think about like how much emphasis we put on certain types of knowledge, like academic research, for example, while often kind of overlooking the knowledge that comes from lived experience, you know what I mean?
That's a crucial point. In many cultures, knowledge is passed down orally through storytelling, through
Yeah.
art forms, and these ways of knowing they may not fit neatly into a Western academic framework, but they hold immense value and insight. They really do.
It's like we've been taught to value certain types of knowledge over others, even though they're all like interconnected, you know?
And that's a direct result of the legacy of colonialism we've been discussing. The idea that there's only one right way of knowing, one valid form of knowledge is a colonial construct. Decolonizing knowledge is about challenging that hierarchy. It's about recognizing the value of diverse ways of knowing.
This is reminding me of something else the source mentioned, this idea of extractive research. I think that's what they called it.
Yes, extractive research is a term used to describe research practices that essentially perpetuate those colonial power dynamics we've been talking about.
So instead of being this like collaborative process, it's more about just taking information without like giving back or
Exactly. It's like researchers swooping in, collecting data from a community, and then leaving without any real benefit to the people they studied. Their voices are heard, their experiences are analyzed, but they don't necessarily have a say in how that information is used or shared.
that just feels so, I don't know, exploitative, you know? Especially when we're talking about communities that have already been like historically marginalized and silenced. It just feels wrong.
And it highlights the importance of ethical research practices. Decolonizing knowledge isn't just about, what we study, but how we study it. It's about building genuine partnerships with communities, ensuring that research is conducted with their consent, with their collaboration, and that they benefit from the findings.
So it's not enough to just have good intentions. We need to make sure our actions are actually aligned with those intentions.
Absolutely. And that requires constant reflection, questioning our assumptions, and being open to feedback, even when it's uncomfortable.
This is reminding me of those like growth mindset books everyone's always talking about.
It's true. Decolonizing knowledge is a continuous process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. It really is.
It's about embracing the idea that like we don't have all the answers, that there's always more to learn, which honestly can feel kind of daunting sometimes, you know? Like where do we even begin to like dismantle these systems that have been in place for centuries? It feels like a big task.
It starts with small steps. It starts with individual actions. That's how these things start.
So what can someone like listening to this right now do? What are some like practical ways we can start decolonizing our own thinking, our own approach to the world?
Well, I think one simple but really powerful step is to diversify your media consumption. Pay attention to who you're getting your news and information from. Are you primarily engaging with voices that reflect your own background and worldview, or are you branching out?
So like breaking out of those echo chambers.
Exactly. Seek out new sources, podcasts, books, films, art created by people from diverse backgrounds,
Right.
particularly those from communities that have been historically marginalized.
So it's about actively seeking out those missing voices, those alternative perspectives. It's about being proactive.
Precisely. And when you do encounter different viewpoints, especially those that challenge your own, approach them with an open mind and a willingness to learn. Listen to understand, not just to respond.
It's about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Because
Yeah.
I feel like true growth often happens outside of our comfort zones. At least that's been my experience.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not about agreeing with everything you hear or read. It's about exposing yourself to different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing the world, which ultimately makes us better, more well-rounded people.
Yeah.
Right?
Which ultimately helps us develop a more nuanced, more accurate understanding of complex issues like forced displacement.
Exactly. Because when we only engage with a single narrative, we limit our understanding of the world and we risk perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
This is making you realize how interconnected everything is, how colonialism's legacy continues to shape not just academic research, but the way we consume information, the way we interact with each other, even just the way we see ourselves. It's all connected.
It's all woven together, and that's why decolonizing knowledge is such vital work. It's about unraveling those threads of power and privilege that are so deeply embedded in our systems and structures.
And it's about weaving a new tapestry, one that's more inclusive, more representative, and ultimately more just.
Beautifully said. And it's a tapestry that we all have a role in creating. It's a collective effort.
So true. This deep dive has given us a lot to chew on, that's for sure. It's one thing to intellectually grasp these concepts, but it's another thing entirely to actually put them into practice in our daily lives.
Absolutely. But I think that's where the real learning begins. It's in those everyday moments, those small acts of awareness and intentionality that we can truly begin to decolonize our thinking and create a more just and equitable world.
So how has a more decolonized approach actually shaped your own work? I know you have a really fascinating example of this, right?
Yeah, for sure. So in my field, we've really started to move away from solely Western-based models of trauma recovery. Expanding our understanding of what that even means.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because for so long, the focus has been on individual therapy and processing trauma through this very specific lens.
Right, which, I mean, it makes sense in a way.
Yeah, totally. But by incorporating indigenous healing practices and community-based approaches, we're starting to see much more, I think, holistic and effective outcomes.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that healing can happen in a lot of different ways.
So it's about recognizing that different cultures might have different but equally valid approaches to healing. It's not about saying one is better than the other. It's about
Exactly.
recognizing the value in all of them.
And that these diverse perspectives can enrich and even challenge, our existing understanding of what trauma recovery even is, how it works, what it looks like.
Okay, that is fascinating. It's we've been working with only half the toolbox this whole time.
Yeah. And sometimes not even the right tools for the job. So
Easily.
it's about recognizing that knowledge and expertise exist in so many forms, and the most effective solutions often come from combining those different ways of knowing.
That's such an important point. And it kind of brings us back to what our source was saying. They argue that incorporating these diverse worldviews is crucial to really truly understanding forced displacement, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if we only look at forced displacement through a single lens, it was a purely economic one, we miss the cultural impacts, the environmental impacts, the intergenerational impacts, all of these things that might be even more significant in the long run, right? To these communities, to the world. We miss all of that if we're just looking through one lens.
It's we're doing a disservice to the complexity of the issue by trying to simplify it too much.
Exactly. And this is where I think the real power of decolonizing knowledge lies.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about being like politically correct or checking boxes.
Right, right. It's about real
It's
time.
about getting a clearer, more accurate picture of the world, which ultimately leads to better solutions, better policies, and honestly just a more just and equitable world for everyone.
It's about like connecting the dots in a way that makes more sense, seeing the whole picture instead of just like little fragments of it.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
that's a journey we all have to take,
Yeah.
constantly questioning, learning, unlearning. It's a lifelong process.
Absolutely. Well, I think this deep dive has given us like plenty to reflect on, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap things up?
I would simply say this. Be curious,
Right.
be open, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions. The journey of decolonizing knowledge starts with each of us, in our own minds and hearts. But its impact has the potential to change the world.
Beautifully said. And as we always say on the show, knowledge is most valuable when it's like understood and applied. So to our listeners, we leave you with this. How might our understanding of forced displacement change if we looked at it through an environmental lens? Or through the lens of intergenerational trauma? It's a question worth pondering, a conversation worth continuing. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.